White. My name is Sonia, and I would like to start by acknowledging that we are on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Secwepemc, and I'm calling in today from Tecumseh to Secwepemc on the lands of Secwepemc Ulu. And I also want to acknowledge that you are joining us from near and far, lands that were caretaken by all sorts of different communities. So thank you for joining us for our third winter webinar in our series of Grasslands as Teacher. Woohoo! Like I said, my name is Sonia, and I do some outreach education work for GCC. The GCC's mandate, Grasslands Conservation Council of BC's mandate, is to foster understanding and appreciation for ecological, social, economic, and cultural importance of the BC grasslands. So here at the GCC, we do that by promoting stewardship, conservation, and sustainable management practices to ensure the long-term health and viability of the BC grasslands. So a few little housekeeping pieces before we start. If you look at the bottom of the Zoom webinar screen, you should see a Q&A box. If you have any questions for our speaker today, could you please type them into that Q&A box, and then I can read them out to our presenter. You'll also have a chat box, and I just wanted to let you know that when you go into the chat option, it will default to hosts and panelists. So just try to toggle that blue box down to everyone when you're sending a message on the chat there to everyone. We also have Ali, who is from TNCC, as our tech support. So if you need to contact Ali for tech support, you can decide that. You can customize that in the chat box there as well. And this webinar is being recorded today, and you will be able to find it on GCC's YouTube channel. So I just wanted to take a minute to thank TNCC for joining us in partnership to put on this series, and wanted to introduce Danielle.
Great, thanks, Sonia. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today on behalf of the TNCC. We're really pleased to partner and co-host with the Grasslands Conservation Council the Grasslands Winter Webinar Series. TNCC operates on the unceded territory of the Secwepemc, St'át'imc, Syilx, and Lakatlum and Tsilhqot'in nations. And we work to support the work of conservation organizations and partners, including Indigenous communities, governments, academia, stewardship groups, and more through communications, networking, and information sharing, and expanding partner capacity around conservation. As you know, grasslands are one of several sensitive ecosystems in the Thompson watershed and require special effort and care to protect those areas that remain. So we're really excited to hear today from Lauren, and thanks again for joining us. Enjoy.
Thank you, Danielle. Awesome. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment and put up a little poll to see where everyone is joining us from today. It's always nice to see who our audience is, where people are coming from. So we'll just get that poll up there. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Ali. All right. Let's see where folks are coming from. A couple more seconds. And okay, great. Oh, we've got some representation from a couple different spots. Great. Oh, and even outside BC. How exciting. Great. And okay, about half from Thompson Okanagan. Fantastic. Great. Thank you. Okay. Always like seeing that. I always assume everyone's going to be from one spot, but then I'm always surprised and kind of tickled. Okay, so I'd like to introduce Lauren Meads. We're pleased to have Lauren here with us today. She's the Executive Director, Burrowing Owl Conservation Society, and Lauren has lived and worked in the South Okanagan since 2011. She's been involved with the Burrowing Owl Conservation Society BC for over 15 years, and she has been the ED there since 2016. She has a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Simon Fraser University and a Master's in Science and Animal Welfare from the University of Edinburgh. Her work has revolved around conservation and has focused on grasslands and primarily burrowing owls for many years. So I'm grateful to have you here today, Lauren, and I can't wait to learn a bit more about burrowing owls myself.
Great. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, TNCC and the Grasslands Council. Just let everybody know I'm currently have a cold. It's not COVID, but my son has been sick for the last week and I just got it and it just got worse last night. So forgive my voice, it's not normally this low and sultry. So, all right, I will share my screen. So today I'm going to talk about specifically the burrowing owls in British Columbia. Okay. So looking at the range, I'm assuming that most people are kind of in Canada, so I just started with this one first. You can see there's the historical range, which is the dark, and then it's sort of since about 2004 was sort of the last really good this is the cold talking. The last sort of really good review of the owls there. Every few years there's more reviews, and you can see that in the 1980s we really dropped in our population. It wasn't a huge population, but it still was there. And that actually connects us down to the Great Basin, down into Washington and Oregon. So we're sort of part of that population, as opposed to Alberta, Saskatchewan being sort of in the prairies, and Manitoba on that edge there. Again, so in Canada, burrowing owls are endangered, they're protected species. So each year they are re-examined and designated endangered. Last time was in 2017. And again, their range BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, with only currently wild owls left in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but probably Alberta around 300 owls and Saskatchewan probably less than 100. Manitoba also has been technically extirpated, though they occasionally get a couple wild owls there. So the reason for this designation, grasslands across North America have suffered large declines. Huge declines, 90% of the burrowing owls declined from 1990 to 2000, and another 60% from 2005 to 2015. Again, most of those remaining individuals are about Alberta and Saskatchewan. British Columbia, Manitoba are doing more of the breeding and release. Manitoba started doing that in about 2011. So reasons for decline, people always asking, well, why? Unfortunately, with burrowing owls, there's so many different things. There's just not one thing that kind of is a reason for their decline. So loss of grassland habitat, we can see that across BC, though you'll notice in the prairies, there isn't necessarily that, it's a different kind of loss there. It's kind of lost agriculture, though they still have some owls. And even here it says it's lost, but it's sort of segmented, I think, a little bit more. It's not kind of in sort of one area. It's sort of in bits and pieces. Suitable habitat burrows made by burrowing mammals. I didn't really kind of go into it, but burrowing owls, the name says, they live inside burrows. They're the only owl to actually live inside a burrow. Generally in BC, they would have taken habitat inside of badger burrows, which badgers are also endangered, but they also would have relied heavily on ground squirrel populations. And that's probably why they're still doing better in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and maybe a little bit in Manitoba, is because there are still prairie dogs and ground squirrels in those areas. Reduction in prey populations. So as the grasslands are converted to agriculture and development, that reduces their food. So a lot of insecticide use, rodenticide use. Increases in predation. Some birds are doing really well in urban settings and in agricultural lands, so like great horned owls, red-tailed hawks, but they also prey on a lot of the smaller species, so burrowing owls being one of them. And when you're a burrowing owl in the grasslands, sometimes you can be pretty easy to pick off. Vehicle collisions, we have lots of roads, and sometimes owls, the only burrows or areas for refuge for them end up being on culverts. So on the side of the road or underneath. And then if they're out hunting, they can get hit by cars. I just was at a conference in California, and they talked a lot actually about renewable energy. And I thought, you know, it's pretty minor with the burrowing owls getting hit, but they actually found that it's probably a pretty significant reason why there's high mortality. It's a lot higher than we thought. And even with non-moving windmills, so they're smacking into them, and solar farms as well are sort of taking over. And so you want to have this renewable energy, but you want it to be good for people and good for wildlife. And then we have severe weather events, which we're all familiar with: flood, drought, fire happening. And then those things are really impacting. So climate change impacting when the owls are nesting. So just a little bit of history on the Burrowing Owl Conservation Society. So they were designated extirpated in the 1980s. Some owls that were actually raised in Ontario were released here in BC. It was part of a provincial government program in the late 80s. And they did a lot of that work in the South Okanagan. In the 1990s, Mike McIntosh decided, he worked on some of that government program and decided, hey, let's actually breed captive owls here, that they're from here. A lot of the owls before were actually owls that came from, after the Ontario ones, they would do like a trade. They grab owls from Washington, and then they, back in the 80s, you could like swap bighorn sheep for burrowing owls and like fewer permits and things like that. So we said, well, why don't we try and breed them here and work with local ranchers and local owners of grasslands. And then the society officially formed in 2000, perfected burrow design, added sites. They had 2 breeding facilities. And from 2005 to now, updated some of their our techniques in releasing. So using a soft release cage, which I'll explain later. And every year we release about 100 owls, and we were able to build a new facility. And just wanted to say that we have 3 facilities across BC. Oh, I think I'll say that a bit later. And we also perfected using feathers to get the DNA, so we know which is it male or female. Burrowing owls are really hard to tell the difference. A year at our breeding facility. So actually a couple of weeks ago, I separated all the males and females. We don't want the breeding before we release them. And then we put together our founders, and our founders are either ones that were from Washington, Oregon, or genetically descended from them. We pair them up, usually around February 14th is nice. They start nesting in April. Burrowing owls can have quite a lot of eggs. They can have 6 to 12, and they actually incubate probably 23 to 25 days. It says 28, but and then they hatch, and burrowing owls are asynchronous hatchers. So and they don't actually start fertilizing until they've laid half the clutch. So when they start hatching, they'll hatch over a period of a few days. And then in July, we ban them all, and we take feathers from them so we know what sex is. And then, so the owls that were actually born last year at our facility, we're going to release them this year in April. So we all release them as 1-year-olds. And it's good to know if they're male and female. So we make sure we put a male and a female together, because, you know, they're not going to breed if we put 2 females or 2 males together. So our captive breeding, again, founding owls from Washington, Oregon. We have a stud bookkeeper, and just want to say we're on the great landowners working together. We have one facility at the BC Wildlife Park in Kamloops. They run that. They pay for all their food and keepers that look after the owls. Our other facility is on private land. It was a rehab center down in the coast and in Fort Langley area. And then our biggest one, or not our biggest one, our newest one is down here in Oliver, in the South Okanagan, and that is where I currently work. And we have volunteers that come in and help. Our release sites are with private ranchers, provincial, federal, We're really excited because we work with the Upper Nicola Band and the Penticton Indian Band. So really happy to be working with the Seal people and learning so much about the land. And they're really the ones that are doing the work with helping to support the owls once they're out there. Nature Conservancy of Canada and Nature Trust of BC. So starting to work now with conservancy groups that are able to protect these lands. This is our burrow installation. If you're ever interested, we sort of stopped for the last few years because of COVID, but we'll probably be doing some maintenance and an installation of burrows. So if you love digging holes, you can talk to the everybody there and you can get my email. So it's a 3-bucket system with a 10-foot long tunnel, and it's a great way for us to access the burrow to see the owls. And our soft release technique. So before this, they were hard release, so they were just put in the burrows. Amy Mitchell in 2005 came up and said, let's use soft release caging. So it's kind of like hacking with that's what they call it with other birds of prey. So we put the cage on, and we usually leave the cage on until the owls have started nesting. Once you take the cage off, so the reason why we do that is they're more likely to stay because they've actually invested in that nest. If we just hard release them, it's 50-50 chance that they might stay. But it's a huge increase when you put the soft release cage. They're also 1-year-old birds that have come from captivity. So we want them to be able to get used to their surrounding areas, and we're also feeding them in there as well. So you can see here, before 2005, before using the cages, we were releasing not a ton of owls, but not great strides. But once we put the release cages, there's a huge increase in the amount of owls produced. So that's number of owls produced per owl. So that's released and recruited as owls that have returned from migration. It's been low the last few years just because we're trying to increase our founder population. People are always like, I want to come to a burrowing owl release. The release
498 releasing male.
And you can see we just throw them in a hole. So everybody's always like, oh, I want to come and throw the owls out. But really it's take them out, stick them in a hole. Sorry. A big part of our program is supplemental feeding. So when they're in the soft release cages, we want to make sure that they're still getting fed. Some things might come in incidentally, but we want to make sure there's food there. We generally feed mice. They're probably our most expensive thing that we have right now. We also feed day-old chicks, but this is generally what a male would bring in. So pocket gophers, deer mice, meadow voles, to sort of entice the female. So we want to make sure we have enough food in there so that the male can sort of bring it into the burrow and show the female. And then even when the cage comes off, we're still going to support them in its supplemental feeding. So we're still going to look at their pellets and see, especially if it's white or yellow pellets, we know they're still eating the mice. If it kind of goes brown, they're eating wild prey. And we want to support them through their breeding season because, again, we're releasing these naive owls. And our bands are really important. So we do get sightings of them all over the place. So if you ever see this green over black band, that means it's a BC burrowing owl. Burrowing owls are super light. So we just use this little jewelry scale. So they weigh between 140 to 180 grams, even up to 200, but nothing over 250. And then we also have the US Fish and Wildlife band. So they're a smaller huge sequence of numbers there, but that is the number sequence that you would report to your local government, and it gets reported back to us. This one is really hard to see in binoculars, but if you see this one and you can report it, then they might be able to try and find it back to us. So the other thing that's sort of probably the biggest reason why we're not getting burrowing owls are staying here. And I think if they weren't migratory in Canada and the northern United States, we might have a sustainable population, is migration. So this is just confirmed sightings. This is not using any technology. This is just people telling us sightings. We even have a few more since then. This is from the early 90s to recently. So that's where we get most of our data. And you can see there is a bit of a trend that they're kind of heading to the coast and going down. We did try and put on these data loggers, and they record late and dark cycles. The only problem is that you need to get the bird back. So if you don't get the bird back, you can't get the data off of it. And it's not very fine detail. One of the better ones is this PTTs. So that's platform terminal transmitters. And they weigh, you can see, almost 6 grams on there. And it's got a little solar panel on there with an antenna. And that's going to give you not super real time, but really good accurate data. And so here's a couple points here. There's this one owl. I mean, we would never have known that it went all the way over here and back, or just this one, just a little short little jaunt. They are very expensive. They're about $5,000. So we have yet to put any on our birds. This is work done by people in the States and in Alberta. Oh, excuse me. Like I said, I was just in a conference in California. It was our last Burrowing Owl symposium was in 2014. And so we just finally had another one. And it was great to connect with people. And our next step is really working again across borders. The problem is, like in California, is they're losing habitat, and a lot of it is relocation. And so we're worried that maybe the owls up north are coming down, and the areas where they overwintered are not there anymore. So now we need to work across borders. And that's the same with any animal. A lot of animals obviously don't see borders, and especially a lot of birds. So this is just from 1992 to last year, the number of birds that we've released. You can see it dipped down again. Like I said, some years we have some founders that pass away, so we have to build it back up again. This is how many wild born, and then this is the important one, is how many have returned from migration. So 2015, we had about 50, 60 owls return, which was great. We thought, oh, awesome. But then after 2017, it crashed again. This could probably due to climate change, things happening in migration. We're not sure. We're finding that this is a similar trend across other areas as well for the burrowing owls. The great thing about this project is the community involvement. It's mostly run on volunteers. I'm the only full-time staff. I can hire occasionally a couple of seasonal workers. But we have people like Upper Nicola Band has some staff that work there. Penticton Indian Band has some staff as well. But otherwise, all of our facilities, especially ones in Oliver and Port Kells, are run on volunteers. They help feed and take care of the birds. And when we need to do any burrow maintenance or digging, we ask people to come out. And it's usually a fun day. There's some hard work, but then we get together. And it's great to share like this cool bird. And I didn't bring my education owl with me today, but here's a little video of him in his enclosure. So that's, sorry, my voice is kind of going a bit. This is Pluto, our education owl, and I brought him to different events, and he lives in one of our big enclosures down in Oliver. And I just want to thank all of our partners, especially the Burrowing Owl Winery. They really help us with matching funds. If you go there and you taste their wine, all of the tasting fees come to the Burrowing Owl Estate Winery. And of course, the BC Wildlife Park for overseeing and taking care of one of the facilities as well. So that's the end of my presentation. There's our website. Please go there. We also have a Facebook page. And yeah, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. I might take a couple drinks of water, and yeah, and I'll just stop sharing my screen now. There we go. Oh, I can't hear you, Sonia.
Thank you. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks for chatting to us, even though you're not
Sure.
feeling well. I really appreciate it. So we have a couple questions, so I'll just read those out. Let's see, and I just want to remind folks, if they can pop their questions into the Q&A box, it's just easier for me to find them right away. All right, so we have one from Richard. What happens to the release program when landowners change? For example, Douglas Lake recently bought the Guichon Ranch.
So yeah, Richard, actually, Douglas Lake didn't buy Guichon Ranch. It was a private people. So a young couple have bought that ranch. And we're hoping to work with them. I just have yet to connect with them. But yeah, this is why we want to work with conservancy groups or, sorry, because yeah, there's always that danger it could be sold and developed. But right now I know that that ranch, it's staying as a ranch. And so, yeah. And even if Douglas Lake, we work with them on one of our other properties. So.
Awesome. Thank you. And I have another question here from DC. How long do captive breeding birds live?
So our captive birds, they can live 8 to 10 years. Generally, we find after 8-9 years, they sort of drop off in production. But we've had education owls live to be 11 to 15, but that's quite long lived. In the wild, maybe 4 to 6 years tops. So they're not a long-lived bird. So that also makes it difficult for conservation. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, that's a bit of a difference there, hey?
Yeah.
And then I have one from Megan, who's wondering if it is the same species of burrowing owl that lives in Florida.
So the Florida one is actually a subspecies. So what I'm talking about is the Western Burrowing Owl. So the one in Florida is a separate subspecies, but they're all very similar. There's also some subspecies in the Caribbean, down in South America as well. But they look very similar, but some of the burrowing owls in Florida, they'll have like a starry eye sometimes, or like a black eye. And sometimes we get messages on our Facebook. People are like, I live in Cape Coral and there's a burrowing owl on my lawn. Can you help me? And like, well, we live in BC. Maybe try your local. There's a local burrowing owl thing there, but they're also in severe decline. So I know some people working there to help them out. Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine you have correspondence with all the other or some other conservation initiatives focused around burrowing owls.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a big group, but it's also a small group in a way. So yeah, definitely know kind of what everybody's kind of doing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have another question. Is it possible to attract owls to our property? We're in the North Okanagan. No problem.
It might be hard. It's unfortunately, it's not like you can just put burrows in and they'll come, just because it's such a small population. You know, if it's great horned owls or bluebirds, you know, it's a bit bigger population, so you could. Yeah, unlikely. But you know, we're always looking for areas maybe that have ground squirrels now. It's especially important, not squirrels, but like ground squirrels. And also we need to have bigger areas of land, so not just like little bits here and there. And also the big thing that I didn't talk about is a lot of our grasslands here has sort of altered from what it was before. So a lot of, like, if you take cattle off, a lot of the non-native species will just grow and it gets really high. And so even if you have mice and things like that, if you have grass that's like 5 feet tall, the owls can't hunt in that. So they need sort of the short grass to hunt in. But of course, you need a little bit of long grass for the rodents and the insects to live in. So you need to have that variation in height. Yeah, I mean, I wish we could just, and it's frustrating because talking to people in California, they're like, we just don't have we don't have enough land. And I feel like we have a lot up here. So we're just like, why don't we have loads of them? But the problem is they are spending 6 months of the year down south. Yeah.
Oh, we have like, I have 8 or 9 more questions. So I'm going to try to get through them. Thank you so much,
I'm
Lauren.
feeling a little bit better. So
okay,
sorry
great.
everybody for hacking.
No, you're doing great.
So
I really appreciate it. This one's from Dennis. Where have you had the greatest success with the program? And are there specific site conditions you look for release, like within a release site?
Yeah, so again, and it seems to like it changes. So before, sort of when we started, we were just like, whoever can let us release burrows on, burrowing owls on their land, great. Because at first people were like, nah, I don't know. And once we kind of got those ranchers on board, especially credit like Don Brody and Dave Lowe, who worked a lot with burrowing owls in the 80s and 90s and working with the different ranchers, and Mike McIntosh. And they really got a lot of the ranchers on side. But now I think we can be a little bit pickier because people really want burrowing owls now on their land. And unfortunately, like I said, with the grass's condition, we kind of need areas that are managed, like cattle managed, but not overgrazed and not undergrazed. So, and sort of that swap from like, we want badgers around, obviously, but badgers also are a predator for a burrowing owl. So you kind of want the ground squirrels there to feed the badgers, but then the ground squirrels also to maintain the habitat and make burrows. And that would be sort of the best thing. But yeah, and so our best success, I would think, is that we have the largest burrowing owl breeding program in North America. So that's great because it has informed other groups on how to best breed burrowing owls in captivity, which is great. And that's the nice thing, is they breed really well in captivity. Also, there's lots of different burrow designs, and our burrows work well. They will breed in them, and the soft release cages are great. So those are our successes. It's just we haven't brought a sustainable population back, but there could be something in that a lot of endangered species, they never reach a sustainable population unless it's heavily managed. So we have to decide if that's something we want to do or not. And our program doesn't run on a lot of money. So considering we're able to put out 100 owls a year and get owls out there, and I think that's a great success in working with the community too.
Thanks, Lauren. I have one from Jeff. How long is the soft release process and supplement feeding?
So the soft release program, like how long we leave the cages on, is that they're asking? Or
I think so. That's what I'm going to assume.
Okay. So yeah, in the beginning it was sort of like 10 days or whatever, but really now we put the owls in there and we want to look for signs of nesting, usually once they've laid about half the clutch or a bit more. So when they've laid maybe 5 or 6 eggs, we know that they're committed to that site. And so we try and take the cages down because we still want them to act natural, and we want the male to kind of get out there and do some of his hunting behaviors. So that seems to be sort of the best time. I mean, of course, there is some loss with that, but there would be more loss if we didn't do the cages. So, yeah.
Great. And I think you mentioned a little bit about this. What is the expected impact of climate change on the owls?
Well, I think it's a
question too.
I think it's already impacting. So we're getting wetter springs. We're kind of looking at the history of that. So the owls here are nesting sort of May time, and now we're getting a lot of rains at that time. So that's preventing hunting. It also increases the vegetation load, so that's going to increase a lot. So yeah, we already see that probably affecting the owls and them abandoning nests because of like the cold rains and stuff. And then even I've talked to some people, and even looking at not even in our region, but sort of heavy winter storms down in Mexico can affect the owls, because if our owls are heading down California, Mexico, and they're having, bad winter storms, like I'm worried now because like, California just had a bunch of snow and stuff. And so the owls are, it can confuse them. It could also, if we get like, we had like one year, it was like really warm in January, and then it got super cold in February. So we had not as many returns. And so maybe there's something there, like they started migrating, and then some winter storms happened. So yeah, I think climate change will definitely change that. We at first thought, oh, climate change, well, it'll get warmer up here, so they'll stay all year round, but that doesn't seem to be happening. So that was when it was global warming, but now it's like climate change. So
yeah, there's a big systemic impact on that in all aspects. I have a question from Cindy. If if there are volunteer opportunities in Kamloops.
Yeah, so at Kamloops at the wildlife park, they do have volunteers help feed and clean the owls at the facility there. So you can always contact me and I can put you in touch with the keepers there. We also do in the spring and April, we need to go out and check all of the burrows. And then I'm hoping we'll kind of get started again. We kind of move it around. Either we have some sites near Kamloops, some near Merritt, and then some down here in the South Okanagan. So we'll kind of move around in the fall and dig some burrows. So yeah.
Great. So they can reach out to you for your contact information. Awesome. From Tanya, I have a question. Tanya says, hi, Lauren. I hope you feel better soon. Thank you for the presentation, all your hard work with the burrowing owls. Do you often work closely and compare notes with the spotted owl recovery team? Yeah, so I actually worked on the spotted owl when they first brought them into captivity. So I worked at this zoo that was terrible. It's no longer there, but I was there when they first brought in the owls, and we were working on getting them to have eggs, and they had one when I was there. And then I actually met the burrowing owl people while I was doing the spotted owl stuff. Yeah, I mean, I do keep in touch with Jasmine there, and I think they're doing a really great job. It's totally different. The spotted owls take forever to mature. And then, of course, they only have one egg, or they have to double clutch. So I would say their breeding of the spotted owls is way more difficult than us. And finding areas for them to release to is much more contentious. So I'd say ours, even though we have some political issues with ours, I would say it's way less. We have more areas to release them to. But then the issues with burrowing owls is they're short-lived and they're migratory, where spotted owls are long-lived and they're not migratory, but they all have their set of issues. So it is good to we still keep in touch with each other and kind of see what's going on. But yeah, it's it's an interesting program as well. So yeah. And this next question is from an attendee. I think you also answered it. If you have releases in the Okanagan.
Yeah, so that's where we release, all in the Okanagan. So the Thompson-Nicola and the South Okanagan. So yeah, and sort of the Thompson-Nicola area we've been releasing since the early 90s. The South Okanagan was done in the late 80s, and we started doing it again back in 2010. So we've got some sites down here. Yeah.
And Megan wants to know if there's one place to report burrowing owl sightings. I've heard of different ones, and they aren't necessarily aligned.
Oh, just tell me. That's always the best.
Okay, great.
I encourage people not to put it on Facebook. Okay. And best, if you can get a band number or a sighting, is to report it on the bird banding site. So the bird banding office, or yeah, that would be the best. If you want to put it on eBird, wait a couple months and then put it on eBird. Do not do it right away, because then people will flock there. But we do occasionally get sightings. And usually the people at the bird banding office will let me know. Yeah, so you can also go onto our website and just email us and report that. That's probably the best. If it's in Canada or BC, if it's in BC. If it's in Alberta and Saskatchewan, again, if you get bad numbers, if you don't, if you've just got like a grainy photo in Alberta or Saskatchewan, you can still email me and I can send you to the appropriate person.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. And your contact information is best to find on the website. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's a general email there. We don't have a phone number. Like, again, I'm the only employee, and then Mike McIntosh, our president, I mean, he's volunteer, basically. Yeah, so we will respond to the emails. Usually takes us a couple days. So.
Oh, and Ali just stuck the website in the chat there for folks.
Perfect, thank you.
So
and we have a Facebook
that, yeah.
page and an Instagram page, which you can access through that too. I try and keep it updated, but
Thank you. You're doing the best you can. That's great.
Hard,
Within
yes.
capacity. Okay, I have 2 more questions here. Thank you for the interesting and inspiring talk. Have you noticed any variation over time or other factors that influence viable hatchlings or hatching success?
So I guess, temperature, burrow. There was a study that Troy Willicombe, so if you want to look up any sort of Canadian papers on burrowing owls, Willicombe, Wellicome, he's sort of like the guy who's done tons of stuff in Canada. He did a study looking at supplemental feeding, like if you boosted, I don't know if this quite answers your question, but if you boosted it sort of when the young hatch, you'll get more likely survival of the hatchlings. So, which is true. They're less likely to cannibalize or siblicide each other, generally because of their asynchronous hatching. The last 1 or 2, they either can't get access to the food or they sort of get stomped on and then get eaten by their parents or their siblings. So if you can provide supplemental feed, that might curtail that a little bit. So you're getting more fledglings. Occasionally, for us as well, if we get to one that's quite small, we'll bring that in we'll bring it in, feed it, and then put it back out. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. Or is it how many eggs are laid? Generally in our facilities, like between 8 to 10 is in a clutch. They probably, if they notice that there's a lot of good food and stuff around, they're going to have higher clutches. If there's not as much food, or we found that even some residents down like in Arizona and stuff, they're not going to have as big of clutches. So we're wondering maybe, they're having bigger ones up here because they're like migratory. They need to get more bang for their buck. So yeah, not sure if that answers your question, but there is some differences, definitely.
Thanks, Lauren. And one more question. I was curious about this one too. So when the owls return, this is from Verena, when the owls return, do they come to the same burrow site as where they were raised?
So generally, yes. So that's why we kind of want to breed them and release them. And so they have that site fidelity. And again, so I kind of think of it as like a sort of a 3-step. So we got our founder owls, they have young in the cages, then those young will be released, and then they have wild young. And it's really those wild young, they're the ones that are coming back in higher numbers. But it's tricky because usually birds come back to where they've had a successful nest. So they had a successful time. So sometimes the young ones aren't necessarily that. We found too, it's generally the males that are more site specific. So the males are going to come back first, establish territory, and then the females are kind of like, oh, I hear male, I'll go back to him. People like to romanticize. I mean, they will, if they can find the same pair, they will. But if they can't, then they'll pair off with other ones. So we found like males will kind of come back to more similar areas, maybe not exactly the same burrow, but general area. And then females kind of can vary. There's been with some of the transmitter work that's done, they found like females can wander 100 to 200 kilometers to different burrows. depending on the males. So that's kind of not great because we're like, okay, we'd like to get both of them back. But at least we're getting males, and then hopefully those males will call and sort of attract other females in. So.
Wow. Okay, I have a final question. What attracted you to do such a deep dive in the burrowing owl? Like, I'm just curious. It's such a commitment and calling.
Yeah, I know, right? So, I mean, I've done other talks where I'm like, oh, I'll tell you what I wanted, like what I went. It's sort of a weird flow, but like I wanted to be a zookeeper. And I worked with big cats. That's what I wanted to do. And I did that for a little bit. But then I kind of got in the section I had cats and then primates and birds. And then I kind of got to work with birds. And I was like, I'm not really a bird person. But then working with the owls, like working with the spotted owls. And at one zoo I worked out with a barn owl. And I was like, these guys are pretty cool. And I really like the raptors. And I thought they're really interesting. They're like the big cats of the sky, right? And so the other thing is like, I love cats. Like we used to have 5 cats, but I've got 1 now. And so I always like to end my thing is like, I love birds and I love cats. So keep your cats inside, please. They can do it because it helps save burrowing owls. And then, yeah, and I really got into burrowing owls because I'm like, this is such a fascinating bird. I mean, it's an owl, but it lives underground. It's got such personality. And really the community was great, like meeting Mike and all of the volunteers he cultivated. They're just really warm, really cool. And yeah, everybody works with burrowing owls. Has been really interesting and fun to work with. And yeah, I love bringing them out too, because people are like, that owl is so small. They didn't, like, people never think that owls are like small. And I'm like, we actually have a lot of small, medium to small owls in the world compared to like your big owls. So that's always really cool. So sort of a different way, but I just always wanted to work with animals, and I'm so happy to work in conservation, and it brings my love of like sort of being a zookeeper, but also working out in the field too. So and learning from other people, which is great.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me that like creation story of that interest and passion. I'm always curious like how people get into this. So yeah, thank you so much, Lauren. I learned so much. If anyone has any more questions for Lauren, feel free to send them her way through the website, through the email address there attached there. And if you have a moment to complete our survey, it will be helpful for us moving forward with other webinars. It's just in the chat box there that Ali's popped in. And there is also an opportunity to register for our next and final webinar on the 15th, where we'll be joined by the GCC and some members of the board to talk about how grasslands enhance our world, talking about the value of grasslands. Great. Thanks so much, Lauren. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody. And thanks for all the well wishes for getting better. And if I give another talk, maybe next year, hopefully I won't be sick, so you'll hear my real voice. But looking forward to meeting some of you if you're interested in volunteering. And thanks again for GCC and TNCC for supporting the burrowing owls and working with us. It's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Bye.
Bye.